Okay. It is 8 o'clock. I'll call this special meeting of the budget hearing to order. Thank you. Would you do roll?
Jim Sheeline,
Here.
Arlen McLean, Doug Farster,
Here.
Rick Humphrey,
Here.
Tom Kitson,
Present.
Lyra Mamini.
All right. That's right. Tripwires. And we need, oh, Arlen's calling. Yeah, Keen, do you have enough cord that you can get them a mic? No.
Oh, here. You want to give them Lara's?
Yeah, Arlen.
John, you want to just take that while you're right there.
Okay, all right, we'll see you in a bit. All right, thanks.
Which one? Jim?
That was Arlen. I haven't heard back from Lyra yet.
Somebody ate the end up of this. Right. It's council.
All right, going down the agenda, we have visitors. If there's anybody here that has anything to say before we get rolling, raise your hand, let it be known, stomp your feet, whatever you want to do. Hearing none. Okay, no old business. New business, Lee County shows there its budget request. Sheriff Simonton had emailed us that he had some additions and new information that he wanted to share with Finance Committee and for the budget process. So we are here to
listen
and learn.
Okay.
So
Do you want to wait till the other two people get online or?
Arlen's waiting for his healthcare worker to show. She isn't there yet, and I haven't heard from Lyra as yet. You can't. So there you go.
Okay, all right, we got everybody here then.
Yep.
So today I want to present with you after Dave and I've been kind of talking about this, I'll call it a complex issue and request. It's appropriate time to come in with some modifications to our request based on some of our discussions. And the first modification I want to make is with the dispatcher. We initially eliminated the dispatcher request for additional staffing, but after further discussion with Dave and Shelley, based on the strategy that we're trying to employ with this float or flex position to try to number one, reduce the amount of overtime, and two, just as importantly or more importantly, trying to make sure that we can get these employees their appropriate days off so they don't have to work so much overtime. By doing that, adding the dispatcher will give the dispatch unit, Shelley's unit, 2 float positions. That will allow a float to be on one side, if you will, for 2 shifts of coverage, and the float position on the other side. So basically what could happen is, our shift schedule typical is a Monday, Tuesday, they're off Wednesday, Thursday, and then work Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So in that particular week, you would have this one float person being on the Monday, Tuesday shift, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the second float position, which is then Wednesday, Thursday, and then the following week. And so on and so forth. So you have one on each side. Basically what we're trying to do in the same fashion with our correction staffing request and law enforcement request. This is kind of in conjunction with the full staffing study that I gave you. It's actually a modification to some of the recommendations that they made based on our unique structure here. And the conservative request I'm making based on the staffing study. So with that additional dispatcher, what we'd also like to do is reduce the total request for this coming fiscal year to 4. That would be 1 dispatcher, 2 corrections deputies, and 1 law enforcement deputy or patrol deputy. rather than the initial 5 we talked about, could be 6 with that additional dispatcher. So I want to reduce that to 4 for this next fiscal year. Again, repeating, 1 dispatcher, 2 corrections deputies, and 1 law enforcement patrol deputy for fiscal 22. And with the caveat that next year during budget hearings, we'll be discussing further the additional 2 patrol deputies that we talked about earlier. Part of the,
Let
yes,
me interrupt you real quick. I guess point of clarification, at our last meeting, I think we had tentatively talked about 3 patrol deputies that we were putting on the table for discussion. And the reason why we thought 3 patrol deputies is you had mentioned earlier that the patrol deputies have the ability to go into corrections, but not the other way around. And so by the head count personnel, that gives you some flexibility that way if they're all patrol deputies versus corrections. Is that, did I misunderstand you, or is
there are approximately 4 patrol deputies that are certified to work in corrections. In other words, the full gamut of corrections. We can put temporarily patrol deputies into corrections to fill some shifts occasionally, as long as we're full out on the road. That's the problem, is we're not always full on the road to be able to do that. So there is, you're right, there is some flexibility there. However, having the 2 corrections deputies and those float positions that we can actually schedule on those 2 opposite shifts versus just bringing somebody in haphazardly, not knowing in advance when they're going to be working and what shifts need to be filled, will be more static for us. And it's cheaper to bring them in.
but the concern, I think, is that that doesn't take care of the overtime issue on the parole side or the patrol side.
You're right. And we have to try to hit all these divisions, but I guess if we're looking at it from a perspective of triage, corrections is getting hit probably the hardest of any division right now. So that's really the one. That's why I'm modifying this request to focus a little bit more on corrections. Having 2 corrections deputies and 1 patrol deputy included in this new modification request will still give us that ability to do what you're talking about, Rick. And it'll be a little bit less expensive this year, not only because we're reducing the request for a personnel. However, as you'll see in the cost sheet that I gave you, patrol deputies are much more expensive to bring in because of the additional equipment that we have to afford them with regard to squad cars and equipment that the corrections deputies would not have, nor would dispatch.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I.
No, that's fine. No. So that's the modification. And also along with that, that does reduce, or I should say actually increase our request for, it reduces the amount of overtime that I can, I guess, absorb. With our initial request of the 5, we were going to try to absorb or reduce the overtime budget by about $150,000. The other reason I wanted to meet today is that can't be done immediately. That's when this program is fully implemented. So we're having a struggle right now with, we're talking about already new hires or replacement hires, I should say, for corrections. We had a corrections deputy resign about 3 or 4 days ago. And so now we're in the hiring process of a replacement for that particular deputy. And we've already gone through 3 candidates, about to go through the 4th one, which means we're going to have to implement a new hiring process, which means that's going to take time. We have to go through applications and written and merit commission interviews, and then eventually get them through a 5-week academy for corrections, which does take time. So I guess what I'm getting at is December 1st, when this new fiscal year rolls in, that overtime reduction is not going to be seen until we get these personnel hired, if that makes sense. On the good side, on the patrol side, if we're looking at 1 additional patrol deputy, if that's approved through this committee, I already have a replacement patrol deputy coming in the end of October for a soon to be retiring detective sergeant. And then we also have interest from another deputy that is working in another state that is interested in working here, would not have to go through a full 14-week academy. We have a reciprocal agreement through Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board with other states that if they meet or exceed the amount of hours at their training academy in another state, all they have to do is take 100 hours of training, which basically is criminal and traffic law for the state of Illinois, and then a firearms recertification. And they are then certified as a deputy to work in the state of Illinois. So that drastically reduces the amount of training we have to send them to. And that 100 hours can be done online. They do not have to attend the academy. So again, it's a huge cost savings by doing that type of lateral transfer. So both of those prospective patrol deputies would be lateral transfers, which will save us quite a bit of money in academy and training costs.
So John, that was my question is when do you think, and we understand that, you got to get this implemented once we decide, what we're able to give you. When do you think that those folks would be up to speed?
Dave is sending out the hiring process this afternoon. He's already starting the application process. So we're hopeful if we can accelerate this to the best of our ability to get a list of candidates by November. And then hopefully get them hired, again, depending on what's approved, by the first part of December. We don't have to send them through the 5-week academy right away before they start. They can actually work in the jail. They have to attend the corrections academy within 1 year of when they're hired, correct? Yeah. So it's a little bit different than the law enforcement academy. And that's only a 5-week academy, which is, again, much nicer for us. We won't lose somebody for 14 weeks.
So you're thinking, January at the outside for the patrol guys, and then corrections would be.
One replacement for patrol should be here by the end of October. The other one is just sitting and waiting until we get an approval or not. So again, we could hire them quite quickly after December 1st. Yep.
Okay.
And then the corrections deputies will be contingent on the hiring process. And again, we're targeting the end of November, 1st of December.
But by the time they got their training done.
Well, we could still hire them, have them work in the jail, but again, they couldn't be basically on their own without a field training officer until they go through the academy. And we've got corrections academies are much more easy to get people into now than the law enforcement academy. If we would bring a new hire on for patrol right now, we can't get them into the academy until August of next year. That's how far out it is. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's why lateral transfers for that division is much more attractive to us.
So in dispatch, there's currently how many dispatchers over there?
We have 9. There's 8 plus 1 float. I'll say 8 because we have to have 2 on each shift.
So it's 2 on each shift every day,
Correct.
and it's 24/7. That's
Correct.
And is 9 county, Shelley, or no?
No. Shelley doesn't work as a dispatcher. She's the kind of that unique position where she's a supervisor of dispatch, but also the director of ETSB or ECC. So she would work in emergency situations. Shouldn't say she doesn't, but she does not place herself on a shift.
Sheriff, you guys have pretty well explained the need for the correction deputies. And we don't need to rehash the history, but we're there, okay? So we've hired 2, correct, since Joe's built 2, additional 2.
Correct. Yes, we've got 3 on each shift.
And these 2 will relieve some of the problems of people being off and illnesses and injuries.
That's the strategy we want to work with.
Okay.
We're calling them flex
So,
positions.
Let's go to Utopia for a minute.
Okay.
Everybody's here. Nobody's off sick. Nobody got hurt. What do these extra people do?
They would fill the vacation days, sick days,
And there may be a little bit of.
personal days,
Okay.
comp days and things of that nature. Yes.
Okay.
And also we would be able to start doing some things a little more proactively, I guess is the best way to determine it. Because we have several days throughout the week, especially Thursdays and Fridays, it could be busy felony days where it would be nice to have another person on the floor during a day shift. There's plenty of work for them to do. Plus, we've also entertained the idea of using that flex position when, like you're describing Utopia, everybody's there, working, which predominantly is our I guess I'll call it a high call volume time for patrol and corrections, which is afternoon and evening. So we'd have them work like a noon to midnight shift at times, as well as a power shift.
So back to dispatch. If my math's correct, everybody shows up, nobody gets any overtime. You need 8.4 people to fill the allotted time. So that you're in between personnel, I guess, but you have 9, I guess. So you've got about a half a person available to cover sickness, float and stuff like that. But if you, how many hours are they averaging now? Do you know at dispatch on a weekly basis?
How many hours of overtime?
Just on a weekly basis, what's the average hourly?
Well, if I could give you hours. I suppose what I could explain,
Well, my question, or where I'm going with this is if the average dispatcher works 45 hours per week, then you drop down to seven people needed to fill the positions. My concern is if we hire a full-time person, yeah, we're covering some overtime, but like Tom brought up, they're just gonna
no, it's the
play
same.
bingo in the times when we don't need them or what?
Well, again, it all comes down to how you schedule that person.
Right.
Definitely during high call volume. I mean, again, law enforcement in our world is changing to where, I would call it from the union perspective and then just from the supervisor's perspective. And one of the conversations I had with Shelley the other day is one of our dispatchers from, I think it was 6 to 10, telling me that she couldn't leave her chair to go to the bathroom. Just based on call volume gets so extreme that sometimes even 2 people can't cover it. So again, using that flex person, you can bring them in, and if nothing else, somebody can go to the bathroom at the same time. We're being what I'm going to call more productive with call volume. The same thing too is, again, even from a training standpoint, fall back to corrections a little bit is we have corrections 1, but we always don't have the time for our people to actually do it because we get so busy with different things that are occurring during the day. So I'm going to call it productivity is what we can get to.
I guess the other thing, Rick, too, is we got to understand that they're not just dispatching for the sheriff's office. It's every PD and every fire and every EMS station in Lee County, as well as communicating with ISP quite a bit and coordinating
So
activities.
Do we have the ability to have a part-time person? I mean, it keeps you away from the benefits and everything else that's attached with a financial cost.
It's
You know,
difficult
they could
to
work
find
30
part-time
hours
in
a
this
week or
business.
something like that.
It's difficult to find good part-time help in this business. It really is.
I'm right there with you. I understand. I'm throwing out alternatives. So we're not breaking the bank on everything that we do. And trying to address a concern. But too often we just go to the easy answer, and that's hiring more personnel, which comes with, a lot of different things. You got vacation time, you got, health insurance and stuff, the costs that come into play. So I'm throwing that out there for discussion. I mean, part-time, I'm sure it would pay pretty well. There might be people that would be interested in a position like that where we don't have to incur the cost of health insurance and the full benefits package and stuff like that. So I'm just throwing that out there for a conversation. Well, we went from taking it off the table, not needing it, to now we need a full-time. So to me, I don't know that I can justify a full-time person is where I'm struggling with.
Well, it's never been not a need. Again, when I come in here, I'm trying to be as conservative as I possibly can,
Sure.
understanding what you have to deal with as well on the financial end. But I'm also looking at, how tired everybody is from working as many hours as they have. And our overtime costs truly increased this last year and a half in dispatch, where it's largely been under control. Since I've been here, Shelley's done a really good job of trying to schedule people for those vacant positions. But again, to have a part-timer, it's going to be difficult because you're going to have to call them sometimes on a last minute notice and say, hey, we got a vacancy.
Well,
Can you work
I'm not,
today or
I'm not necessarily looking at a call in on a last minute basis. I'm looking at you got a known vacation coming up. You've got known, whatever. People are scheduling their time off. That person's going to take care of those hours.
They
That's what I'm
would,
looking at,
but we're running into the
because you've
same.
already got that float position.
Right, and that's working quite well, which
Right.
is why we want to implement this strategy for each division. It keeps the request down based on what the staffing study is actually recommending. So that's why I'm trying to propose what we are to the best of my ability, I guess. But what we've run into with part-time help too, from the transport and court security side, is those folks aren't always available when we need them, unfortunately. And we had to do a transport yesterday with 2 full-time.
And again,
deputies.
I'm not suggesting a call-in part-time person. I'm saying a part-time person that's scheduled for known time off. And they're expected to work those hours. They're not sitting at home waiting to get a call and say, hey, we're short today. They're going to be covering times that, you got a vacation coming up. You're going to be shorthanded. Guaranteeing them something like 30 hours a week. That's what I'm talking about. So.
And the only thing that would go with that is, talking about tremendous amount of training. If we're going
You
to,
still got to train a full-time person.
yeah, but then they're more beholden to us, is I guess what I look at. The idea of, that's one of the issues kind of with part-time people in defense about good ones. But they're not beholden to us, that we put a whole lot of training into them. The next thing you know, they can get that full-time job. I'd be a little fearful of bringing in, let's say, a part-time person, training them, especially to be a telecommunicator, and then all of a sudden they're going somewhere else for a full-time job, if not the whole. I understand what you're
Well,
saying.
I think where Rick may be going is in thinking outside the box, because there's people that retire and they've got their retirement, but they missed the game. And you're coming maybe from a higher volume area that moved out here. I'm just saying that those things happen from time to time, and sometimes you get lucky with somebody that's already trained, so you're not worrying about the training. But you have to, and I completely understand, you have to run into the right person to do that kind of thing, that would want to do that kind of thing.
You're correct on the idea. Again, we use part-time people throughout our departments. Great. Nothing else, we have a great influx of people from Department of Corrections, for bailiffs, for transport, and to train them, it doesn't take much because they already have it. But unfortunately, too, it can become a little bit of a revolving door on the idea if we lose somebody from the Department of Corrections, right, just want to be retired now. It doesn't take as long when we bring in somebody new to get them back to speed. I would say a challenge. You train somebody, and all of a sudden they're gone. I mean, from the idea of, let's say using 2 part-time schedule. Not saying it would work. Every few months.
Is there schooling required for the telecommunicators?
It's all done in-house. But, to get somebody, I'm gonna say on their own, 6 months. Part-time person that we can't bring in the door every day. Double that a year before we get them up and running. Where we legitimately put them, say again, we have some take vacation, bring a part-time person, legitimately put them in that chair and know that they're gonna be able to do what we need them to do. I always tell everybody, the most difficult position we have in the department is on communications. A little reluctant to necessarily put a part-time person that's not doing it every day, always at the speed.
Let us chew on that for a bit, but appreciate the answers, David. And let me switch gears here for a little bit and ask the question. So we had another dispatcher the agreement, that we recover our costs for our people, we have an agreement with the city of Dixon and I think with a couple other folks. Can you describe, I know basically we've got those agreements. Can you describe how those agreements and when we add a dispatcher, how are those agreements affected? And do we need to do a renegotiation with, as we add staff and we add to our costs, are we recovering costs that the other entities that are using these people, so that we're not bearing the 100% of the cost?
We went to the city of Dixon and Amboy, I think it was 4 years ago now, and began talks regarding that agreement and finally settled on a package with them, which actually has expired. So those negotiations have to begin this winter before their fiscal year starts in May so that they can plan ahead. This year, we increased it by the CPI only because there was a caveat in the contract. If we let it expire, that's what it would increase by naturally this year. So that has to be renegotiated. So that could be something that whether the chairman does it or a couple of members from finance. I was part of that initial initiative 4 years ago to get that going, and they were receptive at the time, understanding that the costs we were incurring. And we started out with the strategy of using call volume, which I thought would be fair across the board. So each entity can see what their call volume looks like each year and then charge accordingly. That increase was going to be pretty substantial that first year for both of those entities. So in the interest of compromise at that time, we reduced it down to a different type of formula. It still increased their costs, but wasn't quite as great as what the call volume would be. But that's something that I think we need to
So
start.
it's a fixed amount.
It's an increasing cost each year based on a
Based on
formula
the-
that we devised
Yeah.
at that time. But I think there's an opportunity at some point in time to start looking again at the call volume, because that's really a more of a hard and fast number that we can see. It changes a little bit each year, but not much. I mean, for example, the sheriff's department incurs probably 43% of the call volumes, Dixon PD 45%, and the rest of the entities throughout the county pick up the rest, is basically what happens each year. So, and the fire departments and EMS are not part of this agreement because generally most of their calls are covered under the 911 agreement that is already reimbursed to dispatch. So, yeah, that's something that we could certainly take a look at if,
So what is the
At the time-
contribution from Dixon currently?
you know what it is right now, Paul, it's over 200,000, correct, this year? Okay, yeah, I know it's got to be somewhere in the 215 to 220 range, I believe by now, because I think when it started, it was approaching 200,000. We've been into it for 3 years now. So there's an increasing cost each year. And Amboy is somewhere in the vicinity of 17,000, if I recall correctly.
Did want to add one other thing too, in reference to the part-time dispatcher. From our union contract, I also believe there's something in there in reference to using part-time people to fill overtime shifts. Actually even do. That you, because we.
Well, I mean, that's unfortunate because that just forces us to say, well, then you're going to work the overtime. So on one hand, they want to complain about the overtime, but on the other hand, they don't want us to take away the overtime. So, you know, it's a catch-22.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm just putting it out there on the idea of keep that in mind. as
It's
we
hard to
move
feel
forward.
sympathetic in that particular situation when, if you're going to hold your feet to the fire on that particular wording. That's just my thoughts on it anyway.
We did run into that contract. I'm glad you brought that up because we did run into that about 4 years ago when we started the transport team, because there was a lot of consternation. But the way we were able to work that into the program is that's not scheduled. If it's scheduled overtime or scheduled vacancy, we can't use part-time people right now, according to the contract.
So Sheriff, prior to the FOP negotiations, you were talking, it was your suggestion that we use some part-time people, civilians in the jail.
Correct.
Is
In
that,
the mezzanine
is
area.
that still an option to make a difference here?
Well, it's something I want to entertain, and that would be something that we'd have to talk to the union about to get that moving, if that's a possibility. But again, we're running into that same issue. And the union would have to agree to that. But that, they actually approached me with that idea about 6 months ago. And so it's something that we can certainly revisit.
But again, as Rick said, the cost savings idea, because we don't have all the benefits involved in at least one correction deputy, we can eliminate one of those by some part-time help. As you referred to as civilian help.
Yeah, they would not be certified corrections, but somebody that can handle the control center.
You have any questions?
Sure. I was part of the negotiation. I was part of the negotiation on the 911. Basically, correct, almost everybody around the area is using call volume. The city has still got a good deal based on that because we basically cut our requests in half because they were very upset and talked about double taxation, whatever. There is some room there, in my opinion, that they're not paying their fair share by comparison of what other surrounding Sterling Rock Falls and from the research we did. But I was surprised when I came back on the board that there was, they just extended the contract by 5%. So really we should have renegotiated.
It's time for that. The contract is technically expired.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That was really pretty hard negotiations, or pretty firm discussions.
Well, other than it costing them more money, I can't, how do you argue call volume? You know, the call volume is X in the city of Dixon, that's your cost.
Yeah.
And in utilizing our dispatchers, you know, it's still gonna be a huge cost savings to them, even when we do the cost sharing per call volume.
It was,
So-
it was a compromise on our part too, because as you recall, it's the first time we've done this.
Right.
And so we wanted to tread a little bit lightly, and because what I didn't want to happen, or none of us wanted to happen, is that if Dixon wanted to, they could set up their own dispatch center within the PD, which would be rather expensive. Once I did the research, I think they saw that and had the certified telecommunicators in there working 24 hours a day. Many PDs of that size don't do that anymore, and they just go through the county or their local PSAP. But again, understanding that cost was going to go up dramatically in that first year, I think we
Right,
just
it
came
went
to a
up over
compromise.
$100,000 first year, but it probably, at least from my memory, should be close to double what it is now if you did call volume compared. We couldn't find any place else that didn't use call volume.
There was one other place, but it was very similar to call volume, and they used another strategy, and I can't recall what it is right now. It's up in Kane County. But the majority of the other ones, I looked at probably a half a dozen, 8 other ones, and they were all based on call volume.
Because Sterling Rock Falls had a great fight on that, but they ended up coming with call volume. So that there is some potential money, but it's just gonna have to be negotiated. I don't know who made the decision to just pass and go on to it, because they were very irate on double taxation stuff that didn't make any sense, but yeah.
So in your opinion, with a new agreement, would it be possible to recoup the cost of a new dispatcher between Amboy and Dixon?
Well, that's, again, I can't speak for
Well, I
Amboy
guess
Dixon and what they're
what's
going
their
to do.
alternative?
But
Like
yeah,
you said,
I think you can certainly renegotiate and get very close to what a new dispatcher would cost for the increase for both of those
well, to
units of government. Because we still haven't talked to Ashton or Franklin Grove either. So I mean, maybe a 1% increase there, but it's, again, it's something, they are using the system. So, we had talked about it at that time, and it's probably something that we should discuss again soon and get to those other entities.
Well, it's to progress this conversation because we've been talking about it for over a month now. I could support either a part-time dispatcher, or B, a dispatcher full-time position if we can recoup the cost between surrounding cities. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I know you guys got a workshop, so I'm not looking for a hard and fast decision.
Well, no,
today. I
but we
just
need,
wanted to make
we need
sure
to
that-
come to some resolution because we got to put this into our budget, which we have to
Right.
present to the full board. So we need to know what we're gonna do.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I
So what
understand.
I was thinking, Rick, is that when we conclude this conversation, we'll ask Paula to plug in the sheriff's request, which is actually a reduction. So when we'll see, because it was originally, I think you had plugged in 5, Paula.
No, but last meeting, we only talked about 3.
We talked about 3,
I
but
took
but
the
all of
last-
our materials have the 5, so this.
No,
would-
the last
no?
materials have the 3, I
Oh,
believe.
the
I
new one
think,
has the 3?
I think the ones that I gave you had the 3. I think I took
Oh.
those out.
All right, I was.
So I don't know where you're at with the 3, but just leaving you today is the dispatcher, 2 corrections deputies, and law enforcement patrol officer. That's a reduction of 1 from my original request, but it's also a reduction of equipment. Because of my original request, we had 3 law enforcement patrol officers in there, which included 3 new squad cars and all the equipment. So there is a substantial request in equipment there as well. So I can get that to Paula, the numbers I gave to you along with that equipment cost.
The other concern I had was that we tried to do things on overtime 3 or 4 times. It presented staff positions to eliminate overtime. We've never been successful. It takes so long to get people trained and whatever, phasing in the numbers of, let's say we settle on 3 just for discussion. Phasing that in over a period of time will be less than the 4 positions or whatever, because by the time you send them through class and all the things like that, they're really not available till mid-year anyway. So it wouldn't be a January 1st necessarily.
Yeah, the only 2 that I can tell you that with a reasonable assurity is that the patrol deputies would be ready by then. And then our hiring process will be done for corrections. So the corrections will not be through the academy by January 1st, no, but we could have them hired by then.
Okay, so you could actually, if you could find, there's people applying, because everybody's trying to get positions filled.
Hired. Let's say we get the additional 2 with the one that we need to replace. We can stagger their academies, but they're not on at the same time.
Well, for whatever reason, there's always been workers' comp or something else that has caused us not to be able to not do overtime. We've blown out our overtime budget 3 years in a row and tried 3 different things. This is the 4th.
Even just to throw at you right now, we're in that same position.
So
We had 1 resign, so we have an open spot. If we
That's-
fill that, then we got a guy going to knee surgery, we'll have an open spot. By the time he might be coming back, we do have to send somebody to the academy, we're gonna have an open spot. We're in trouble.
So John, that leads into my next question about the overtime. I mean, for full disclosure, last time we met, you weren't here, but I was questioning the ability of any department head, not just you. But how, when we know when we're out of money in a particular line item or in a budget, for example, how are we able to continue to spend that money? And so my question is statutorily, your requirement is to provide security at the courthouse and in the jail, correct? Or are we required by law to have road patrol?
Yes,
We are.
yes.
And is there a certain standard that we have to meet as far as the number of employees that we have out there? Or is that just up to staffing what we feel is good for the county?
Yes, but I feel is necessary in conjunction with finance committee and what they can afford. So I present to you what I believe is necessary to have out there as minimum staffing, and then you decide whether we can afford it.
Well, and this topic came up because if we set an overtime budget, we run out of money. How are we continuing to spend that money is why I asked the question. So I guess that's why I'm asking you now is if there's no money, how do we continue to put people on the road or incur the overtime?
And that's the problem that we run into the last couple of years. So the only thing I can do on my end is not have anybody on the road. And again, it's unsafe for the public. How do I determine who doesn't work that day? Is it corrections
Well,
deputies? Is it-
They're hard decisions. I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying is we have the same thing. It's just in a different format here. We're not talking about people's lives and stuff like that, but we're talking about spending money we don't have. So
So to follow Rick's comment is that, so last meeting, we cut your overtime budget in anticipation that we were talking 3, and that was patrol and also covering corrections. So, we were using some of your numbers to cut that overtime. So we cut $100,000. So you're going to be $200,000 now. With your new request, you're showing that cut is going to cut overtime $95,000. So we're pretty close. So the expectation I think Rick's alluding to is that when, as the fiscal year goes through, and you see that you're going to be going over that overtime budget, you're going to have to come back to finance committee and say, we're going to be over and we'll have to do budget adjustment, or we're going to have to figure something out.
Mhm.
So I think Rick's wanting just to emphasize that we got to really watch that overtime line item and anticipate where things are going so that we know what's going on.
And that's why I've tried to do, even the beginning of this year, I think by March, I was already having those discussions with you based on the anomalies that were happening within the sheriff's office. And some of the things we can predict, some we can't, unfortunately, since I've been here, seems like we've had a long-term injury almost every year with someone in some department. And when that happens, and when you have the type of staffing that I have, that impacts overtime right away. That way, the only strategy that I've come up with right now, barring going into that full staffing study and staffing this department appropriately according to the staffing study, is the flex position. And having that opportunity to have that person out there that's ready to go for those times when we need them. And they may be working a full shift for 6-8 months based on a long-term injury, but they're filling that shift and we're not incurring overtime. So that strategy's been done in dispatch. We've had the opportunity to do it in the law enforcement division. It does work. But then when we start losing people, we're back to the overtime issue.
So on your road patrol, if I understand correctly, you got 2 daytime patrol officers and 3 at night. Is that correct? Every day?
That's generally what we try to stay with as a minimum out there. And there are times we have 4 at night, but not very many.
Okay, and does that include your sergeants and stuff?
Yes,
So there's just 2 people work during the day
correct.
and then 3 at night, and I'm just, at what point in time does the overtime incur when you have say you have a road patrol person call up at night or is not available for night? Do you call in a sergeant then, or do the sergeant?
It'll be the next person. We have an overtime mandate list, so it'll be the lowest seniority person that has the least amount of hours that'll get called in. That is available for that shift. I have to put that caveat out there too, because if they just got off the day shift, they can't work a 12-hour night shift. So it's a little bit of a scheduling chess game.
Paula wanted to make a comment a while ago, and she's been very patient. So Paula?
I was just going to tell you, I've lost track of how many times I've put these positions in and out. So right now I have 4 positions in, additional positions in, and so your bottom line is 380,000 in the hole, upside down. So
Is that the 3, is that dispatch, 2 corrections and 1 law enforcement?
more or less, yeah.
Okay.
Sheriff, in the past, you have told us, I know numerous times, that by state statute, the only thing we're required to do is mandate it or manage jail.
No,
I've heard you say that we're dealing with jail.
no,
Okay.
no. No, it's the same question that Rick asked.
I
We're
know, that's why I
mandated
want
to do
clarification.
patrol,
Okay.
jail and corrections. Yeah.
Arlen?
The one thing I found very interesting, I thought you did a great job on the study of how you come up with staffing patterns. I thought, you did that big sheet. One of the options is for that we authorize budget level and what you can afford. So as led me to believe there is not a mandate for a certain amount and you just want high quality services and maybe we need 3 or don't need 3, but my intent or my thought of doing it is we try to phase in the people and see if it helps overtime. If it doesn't, then we're just gonna have to go back to what we're before.
And I think that's, Arlen makes a good point, is, what we would love to have and what we can afford are, two very different things. Right now, we're at 2 to 3. And I think that's where my comment to you last time we were together is, I made the comment of mission creep. And if you didn't understand what I meant by that, is, moving from 2 to 3 to 3 to 4 and because, and that kind of thing. And, as we have those discussions, we're going to have these discussions every year, every budget cycle, we have these discussions. But I think from our perspective, the finance committee's perspective is that, probably what we can afford is 2 to 3. And we just have to have that mindset unless there's something that happens, and workload and resources that we can go to that higher staffing level that you've alluded to multiple times, John.
Yeah, and I get that, but in the same vein, when you say 2 or 3, according to that staffing study that I know you've read, Arlen, because you made a couple comments on it, if you want 2 or 3 to be working each day, how many do you actually need on your staff to make sure that that works without incurring overtime? It's double that number. So that's the problem we're running into. That's why I went to the flex strategy, not going to the full staffing study, because knowing fully well we can't afford it. So this is kind of that compromise that I'm trying to come
wait a
up
minute,
with.
that always, that confuses me. So for 2 to 3, the staffing study, it's a 5.5 to 6.
Mhm.
And we're at 14, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so you say we need double what?
With the amount for that shift. In other words, if I want 2 on that shift, I better have 3 or 4 available for that shift because somebody's going to end up taking off. With the amount of vacation time that we've provided to the employees through various negotiation cycles, we've got 862 days a year we have to cover in all these divisions. That's somebody off 2.5 people off a day.
So
Unfortunately.
was the 5 point, so what you're telling me is that 5.5 to 6 really isn't an accurate number.
It probably is. It's probably really close, which makes it very high if I would come in with that type of request.
You schedule overtime, how many deputies do you allow off at one time?
Go ahead.
Well, in the corrections division,
No, road patrol.
patrol, if we have 4, 1 can be off out scheduling overtime. And then if there's another that's looking to take off, if we have 4 that night, we would allow 1 person off. So that would incur that 1 shift overtime. Using your day shift,
So
only 1 can take the day off, but no matter what, we have to fill that because we only have 2.
So the patrol deputies in particular, do they schedule their vacation time at the beginning of the year? Or is it just they come to you throughout the year and say, hey, I need a day off here today or a day off tomorrow or whatever?
From sick time, personal time, comp time.
No, I'm talking about
time.
vacation time only.
Yes, they can do that.
Or do you require them to?
I'm not sure if I understand what you're asking.
A lot
Along the
of
lines
places require at the beginning of the year, and you usually do it by seniority, to say, okay, you got 3 weeks vacation coming up. I want your schedule for at least 2 weeks of it or whatever, so we can look forward down the road as to make sure we have enough staff to cover the positions available, rather than 4th of July weekend shows up and you got 5 people that want it off, and now all of a sudden we're incurring a lot of overtime. And I'm using that for an example.
Right, I understand what you're saying. Any extended time, we'll get that in advance. So let's say somebody is going to use, if they have, like, most of our people have 19 days vacation. So if they're going to use, let's say, a 2-week period, we'll get that well in advance. And it's not necessarily how you can plan for it, but you know, okay, that particular days are set, nobody else can take time off.
Well, I guess that's what I'm
Now-
trying to allude to, is if we set up a schedule at the beginning of the year and say, okay, you guys write down your request for your vacation. If you know you're going to wherever in September, for example, you know, you need a week off, at least you know, so you can start planning for that. And then when the versus coming into September, now they got, you know, all this time off and everybody wants it off. And now we have all this either comp time or overtime incurred, which compounds our problem, I guess is what it looks like to me is kind of happening.
But I guess maybe I'm confused on what, because if we have a deputy right now that comes in and says, hey, I'm going to take vacation for an extended period of time, 3 months from now, you know, by shift, you only have so many people on that shift. And again, if they had 4, I mean, really, it's easy to deal with because, all right, he's just off. But from our vacation time or any time, I'll throw the contract out again. They do not have to give us that an extended period of time.
But
They
you
can
have the
drop a
ability,
vacation day.
you have the ability to manage the workforce.
To a certain
And part of that
extent.
is making them provide you with a schedule of vacation if you desire to implement that.
The only thing is that, again, Rick, and I don't like this either because I'm going through a grievance process right now because I denied a vacation day. And it may go to arbitration, but nonetheless, the only thing in the 2 things in the contract, one is by, I think it's October 31st. If you want a week's vacation the following year, you can put it in by October 31st and then it'll be granted by seniority. So seniority will trump any other vacation
Right.
days. So that's by contract.
And it
If
should.
you put it in after October 31st for the next year, then it's first come, first served. You get your time, vice
But I
versa.
don't-
But I also can't unreasonably deny vacation time. So if we have a case,
Unreasonably becomes a talking point if the money's not there. So.
and I'm testing the waters right
Yeah.
now, so we'll see what happens.
I suppose to answer your question, we do what you're saying, you try to schedule accordingly, but at the same time to necessarily have the staff just jumble around and, okay, you're gonna fill this, you're gonna fill that, that's not necessarily what we have. Because, I mean, I look at our patrol sergeants who do our schedule, do a very good job of trying to keep our personnel. in-
Well, and don't take this the wrong way, because it's not meant to be offensive in any means, but their only real concern, or probably is to make sure they got a shift covered. And it doesn't necessarily reflect, they might not be making decisions based on how much it's going to end up costing us or whatever down the road. And, you know, again, I'm not expecting them to do all that, but I'm just looking for ways that we can perhaps implement some procedures to kind of offset some of the issues we're facing is, you know, overtime, which in turn leads to comp time, which in turn leads to more problems because that's what, for every hour they work, they get an hour and a half off, and then that just shorts you even more. So.
But, and again, just to sort of the comp time, to me, the comp time can work if we have necessarily all of the staff cover it. Because if we have all that extra staff and if somebody incurs overtime and they'd rather put it into comp time and then they can take that day off and nobody has to work it because we have the staff to cover it, comp time becomes a wonderful thing. We start more overtime.
But more times than not, it creates a bigger problem.
And right now, I'd say, yeah, because we don't have the staff to cover it.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have to close the hearing so we can prepare for our regular finance meeting. Yeah, my treasurer's over there tapping our watch. Yes, I was keeping track of the time, Ms. Treasurer. So anyway, gentlemen, appreciate you coming in and giving us this update and the clarification. So I guess, well, we'll talk about how we're gonna proceed with the budgets in the finance committee. So anyway, thanks for coming in, guys.
Thanks for your
Appreciate
time.
it. Clean up housekeeping, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the budget hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Tom, seconded by Doug. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you.